Hello, welcome to Chile Talk. I'm Neil Davidson. I'm with Pete Lee, and we're halfway between the first round of Chile's presidential election campaign and the second and final runoff. And Pete, things have changed, haven't they, a bit?
Yes, they have. Well, we've got down from 7 candidates in the first round to 2 candidates, the final 2 candidates in the runoff. Now, normally in a Chilean election, there's an increase in the number of people voting in a simpler election. The simpler the choice is, the more people vote. So, for example, in 2017, 6.6 million voted in the first round and almost 8 million voted in the second round. This time we had about 7 million vote in the first round.
I see. And so, well, we've obviously no idea yet what the turnout will be for the second round. But I suppose we can expect a bigger turnout then on historical.
Yes, you would think it can get bigger. In this case, we have 2 candidates who polled reasonably well. Cast got almost 2 million votes in the first round out of 7 million, and Boric got over 1.8 million. So there's not that much difference between them. But if the number of votes, total votes cast in the second round goes up, they both need to get a lot more votes to win.
So after the result of the first round was that, as you just pointed out, Jose Antonio Cast was comfortably in the lead over Gabriel Boric. The polls are now showing a reversal, aren't they? That Boric is fairly comfortably in the lead in the polls.
Yes, absolutely. And you have to take the polls with a grain of salt sometimes. Sometimes they're better than others. Some are better than others. Some are more ambitious in their methodology than others. But this time, quite surprisingly, after the good performance of Cast, it did seem that Boric's numbers were going up. At the same time, that Boric's campaign seemed to be coming into a more organised style, including a number of really fairly canny moves that seemed to make him more viable on some level.
Right, because Boric was rather quicker off the mark, wasn't he, than Cast in this thing of reaching to the centre, which traditionally everybody does for the second round once they've defeated their own ideological soulmates, as it were, and they have to command the majority of the whole electorate. So Boric, well, he repudiated some remark of Daniel Jadwe's, didn't he, about Paris's voters being just a bunch of money grubbers.
Yes.
He was very quick in repudiating that and saying how we need to hear everybody's views and all that kind of very moderate, reasonable stuff, didn't he?
Well, and Franco Parisi was very articulate in slamming Jadwe and making him look like a bit of an idiot. Jadwe, of course, owns, I think, 5 known flats and earns 6 millones of pesos of public money as the mayor of Recoleta, and did look a bit like a gangster in making those claims against Parisi's voters.
Interesting. I mean, just to practically turn aside to the subject of Daniel Jadwe, he was, of course, the favourite on the left going into their primaries. A bit of a surprise defeat, but a quite big defeat by Boric. In those, I think Boric got 60% of the vote, didn't he, in those primaries against Jadwe?
Yes.
And it's interesting. I mean, Jadwe on paper and in practice was actually a pretty good candidate. He's got experience of running things. He's run big projects. He invented these municipal pharmacies. There's a kind of pharmaceuticals in Chile are really quite scandalously expensive. There's a kind of real cartel operated by the pharmacies, isn't there? And he created this model of the municipal pharmacy selling stuff for cheaply, which then everybody copied. So he's been a real innovator. He's run stuff as well. He was an architect. He run the Central Station Cultural Centre. He set up lots of things. So whereas Boric has basically run nothing except a student union, really, has he? But well, I mean, just to sort of backtrack a bit, what do you think? Was it just because people realised that a communist was unelectable by the whole nation, something like that? Was that it?
Well, I mean, the Communist Party traditionally has the Communist Party's votes, which is quite a large number. It might be 500,000 voters, but it really struggles to appeal to anyone else, including a lot of other varieties of leftist ideology. The socialists, for example.
Yet he was the favourite overall for the primaries, wasn't he? Despite this, and so obviously a lot of people changed their minds, I guess, in those primaries and decided.
Yes.
I suppose, just thought the communists can never be president in this country. Maybe was that it?
Mm-hmm. Well, yes. I mean, the Communist Party is perceived as being very organised, but within its particular clientele, and beyond that, it struggles.
Yeah, well, that proved to be the case. I was reminded because, of course, until 1993, when he joined the Communist Party, Kadwe was a member of the, not the PLO, but the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, I think.
Yes.
And then the day after the Oslo Accords, he switched to the Communist Party, which reminds me of the Scottish poet, I don't know if you know this story, of Hugh MacDiarmid, a very well-known poet in Scotland, who was expelled from the Communist Party for being a Scottish nationalist and from the Scottish Nationalist Party for being a communist, But Kadwe, I noticed, did them consecutively instead of simultaneously, and so he wasn't expelled from either. Anyway, but that's an aside. Anyway, he's now, well, Boris has promised to listen to and work with quite a lot of people now, hasn't he? And one of the first people he promised to listen to and work with was Kadwe when he defeated him.
Yes.
And well, I think this is something we're going to have to cover at some point, which is what if Boris wins, obviously especially before the election, or after it, if he wins. If Boris wins, what real influence will the Communist Party have? That's because it's being played down at the moment, isn't it?
Yes, and the handing out of portfolios and other patronage within the government. Well, we'll have to think about that as we get closer. At the moment, of course, many centrist figures have come to back Boric. The centrists in general, including the Christian Democrats, a big part of their identity is that they perceive themselves as anti-Pinochetist, a theme from 30 years ago. And Cast has made the mistake of not distancing himself sufficiently from Pinochet.
That does kind of leave a slightly bad taste, doesn't it? Because in other respects, it's very hard to paint him as a kind of Nazi or fascist, really, isn't it? As so many efforts have been made to do so. But on that point, he's definitely vulnerable, isn't he? I mean, he doesn't seem to feel any kind of visceral distaste for the dictatorship, I suppose.
No, absolutely. And there's no point trying to make a nuanced argument about supporting certain aspects of the military government and not others, because the public can't follow the nuanced argument.
Yeah.
And then you end up getting this sort of split understandings of things, and it's awkward.
It'll be interesting to see how that weighs, obviously against him. It'll be interesting to see how this alliance with the communist weighs against Boris. And who knows, perhaps we'll never know, because the two just might cancel each other out.
Yes.
Because people have got to vote for somebody,
Yes. Well, Boris got an incredible recruit. He recruited the absolute electoral dynamite and probably future president of Chile, Isquia Sitches, who is the president of
the council, the medical council, what's it called, the College of Chile.
Yes,
and
she resigned from that.
Yes, of course, and very prominent in the pandemic, of course.
Yes,
quite telegenic.
Prominent in the pandemic, and if the international press is to be believed, she is the mastermind of Chile's response to the pandemic.
So you chuckle, Pete. So let's be clear about this. You're suggesting she wasn't the mastermind behind Chile's response to the pandemic.
I don't think that's the perception in Chile, but it seems to be one of the themes that's picked up upon, because Chile's response is normally seen to be a very good one by Latin American standards, and it's been a team effort and lots of different groups have been involved. But I don't think it would occur to Chileans that the head of the medical college is the mastermind of the response.
Right, she simply doesn't have the power in that role, does she, really?
No,
Even if,
no.
Yeah, yeah, okay. But anyway, she's been a very good performer, and I think she's considered quite moderate. I think she talked in the past about how that she wouldn't commit herself to any. I mean, why would anybody even bother to ask the head of the College of Doctors about their political opinions? But this is like, okay, let's just accept that this is done here. She was already quite prominent beforehand, and she was asked about her political views and would not commit to anything, and talked about working with people, and she had colleagues who were quite right wing, and she admitted she was kind of left wing, whatever. But now she's come out for Boric and been a very articulate spokeswoman.
Well, she's also a converso. She was in the communist youth, and at some point, I think in her early 20s, she distanced herself from the communist youth. And now, if anything, she's not even Frente Amplio aligned. She'd be further towards the centre than Frente Amplio.
So her endorsement is quite positive for Boric, and Cast has tried to respond, hasn't he?
Yes. Well, he brought in the subsecretary for health in the government, who's also done a good job.
This is Paula Daza. Mm-hmm.
Paula Daza, who's older than Iskia Sitges. Iskia Sitges is early 30s. I think Paula Daza would be around 50. And she's not quite as attractive and a prospect as Iskia Sitges, who's actually now running the campaign. She's the campaign head for Boric, replacing Giorgio Jackson, who's kind of Tweedledee to Boric's Tweedledum in Frente Amplio, and perhaps not the best campaign manager there ever was. And I think, in a way, the symmetry is quite nice that Paula Daza was brought in, because it's a signal from the Cast campaign that Iskia Sitges is a very attractive candidate, a very good person to have running a campaign and positioning herself politically. And I think it's quite a gracious thing to respond as close to in kind as possible. Sitges has connections with Arica in the north, and
so that might put some of the Parisi voters, because the north went strongly for Parisi.
Yes.
Though on a topic which was largely immigration, wasn't it? That was which I don't know if she can't necessarily transfer that support just by being from Arica, having connections with Arica, can she?
No. It's highly symbolic on that front. But she is the real deal sometime in the future, I'm sure.
Okay, so we have a prediction from you that she'll be kind of president one day. You think she's young and sort of...
Yes. I think in Chile Talk Series 7 or something, we'll be talking about Iskia Sitges and her candidacy.
Oh, well, let's hope our viewers have that much patience with us.
Yes, and at the same time that Boric was putting things together, really surprisingly, Cast was taking a few blows, including the exposure of some unfortunate comments from one of his new and few deputies from his Partido Republicano, Johannes Kaiser.
That's right, the brother of Axel Kaiser, so the kind of political family. Axel Kaiser is a kind of commentator, really, isn't he?
Yes, he's a sort of commentator. He works for the Foundation for Progress, which seems to be a pan-Latin American or pan-Ibero-American even organization that kind of forwards classical liberal and libertarian perspectives.
That's right. Just as a what's it called, statement of interest, whatever it's called, I do sometimes write for a magazine that belongs to the Foundation for Progress called Atomo. So I am occasionally employed then indirectly by Axel Kaiser. But anyway, it's a fairly classical liberal, as you say, organisation. I don't think.
Yes, I mean, I must admit, for my part, for at least a couple of years in Chile, I assumed that Axel Kaiser was a bit like Stephen Colbert, the American late night talk show entertainer who pretends to be a rabid reactionary. And his whole shtick is like that. And I thought that Axel Kaiser was doing the same thing because he seemed to be a bit of an agent provocateur. But I've
secretly undermining his own message, is what you're trying to say.
Yes, but I've come to understand that he does sound a little bit like he's explaining things in a somewhat patronizing way to people, but perhaps that's necessary for his audience. I know that he's funded by the guy who used to own Econo, which is a supermarket chain that was overtaken by Walmart, which is called Leader in Chile, perhaps 5 years ago. I used to go to Econo, quite a good operation. It's a very economic supermarket, and Leader Express is a sort of bare bones supermarket on the Econo model, from what I can tell.
Okay, so this is where the money comes from.
Yes.
But nothing too sinister anyway, all sort of out in the
No,
open.
I think they're advancing the basic idea that free markets make people richer and bring more opportunities, which does seem to be the empirical reality for Chile.
Right, you gave this as an example of the kind of facts you would try and convey, which is like you have to grow the economy to have a bigger state and that kind of thing.
Yes, that's essentially where Axel Kaiser is coming from. I think it's a very reasonable position.
But then his brother Johannes, so he's a member of Kast's party, the Republican Party, and he's actually a deputy, one of his few deputies,
and a YouTube entertainer like us and like Axel as well. But he's said some awkward things.
Now, let me remember. I think he said that there was a kind of schizophrenic type of woman, in particular, who he was talking about a certain type of left-wing woman, who the kind of person in Britain we would call a Guardian reader, I suppose, in the States we call a sort of liberal, New York liberal, whatever, who would vote for increased immigration and then be too frightened to walk in the park for fear of being robbed or raped. The implication being that these crimes would probably be committed by immigrants, which can or cannot be the case depending on the place. I guess we're not going to go into the statistics on that at this moment. But that, of course, pressed a number of red buttons, didn't it? He ended up apologising, and Kast repudiated it. These statements, didn't he, with a bit of a lag, I think?
Yes, it was an awkward moment. I mean, it was certainly simply praised as misogynistic comments.
Only said that perhaps it'd been unwise to give them the votes. These kind of people. Yeah, I think that was kind of clincher. Now he was clearly sort of joking up to a point, but obviously also trying to say something valid as well. So yeah. So was Kast quick enough on the mark, off the mark? And
I'm not sure. It was looking very bad for him.
But hang on a second, we say that it was looking bad for him because he didn't refute it. I mean, do most people get really offended by that, or are we talking about a kind of little liberal bubble really that gets offended by all this?
Yes, I mean, it does make you wonder who's listening. I mean, some people want to hear that Kast is a misogynistic, person who wants to prevent abortion and all of these things.
And they're not
going to vote for Kast anyway.
Yeah, they already thought that. It's not going to change their vote. And, and quite possibly, in this country, I mean, it is like everywhere else in the Western world now, which is there's a great deal of unease about immigration. And from the left, this is always put down to racism, and therefore it cannot be discussed in polite society. But then, of course, voters often tend to respond quite positively to people who, want to get tough on immigration. So I don't know, I would suggest that possibly these kind of comments won't necessarily do them any harm,
Yes, I mean, Kast went on what was looking like a fairly unwise lightning tour of the United States, looking like, at least as far as the opinion polls that we could get hold of were indicating, it was looking like he was falling. His star was falling. But since going to the United States, things have really started to look up for him. And actually, our man across the water, as you described him previously, Franco Parisi, is playing a role in that. I wouldn't say a kingmaker role, but a very interesting role. Now, Franco Parisi, it's quite clear that he doesn't like Boric, whom he calls Boric. Of course, it's often a point of tradition in Chile and in Latin America that you pronounce your name in the phonetic Spanish way, or you change the spelling to do so. And for that reason, Franco Parisi likes to call Boric Boric, which is rather lovely. And Parisi has
with a hint that he's not a true Chilean, I suppose, if wants to read something in it beyond a desire to goad one's rival.
Yes, I'm not even sure what it means, but you're supposed to call your opponents by the name they want to be called by, and of course, Jose Antonio was addressed as Jose at one point by I think by Boric himself, and it was seen as an attempt to wind up Jose Antonio. Of course, someone called Jose Antonio will typically be called in their family Antonio, because if you're called Jose Antonio, you probably have a Jose Manuel or a Jose Miguel in your family.
That's right. The female equivalent, of course, is Maria. So lots of women in Latin American and Spanish-speaking countries, women, Maria, Angelica, Maria this, Maria that, and of course they're called by the second name, and the Maria is just kind of used for formal occasions.
Yes, and it's a bit odd to call someone who calls himself Jose Antonio Jose. That's unusual.
It's quite odd.
At least in a sort of public life.
So he had it coming.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, Parisi runs his own talk show, his own sort of YouTube talk show, or it might even be on his own platform. I don't know. Not everybody's on YouTube, And it's called Bad Boys. The correct pronunciation is Bad Boys. Bad Boys with a Chilean accent. And this is some of these mildly libertarian Partido de la Gente, Party of the People figures talking about politics and life and economics, with their ringleader being Franco Parisi. And Franco Parisi has invited both remaining candidates to an interview, which will be coming up shortly.
Okay. Yeah. And because Boric has been rather avoiding sort of interviews, hasn't he?
Well, Boric says that he's available for all interviews, but he's much more lukewarm, if even lukewarm, tepid perhaps, with regard to participating in a one-on-one debate with Jose Antonio Cast. And it would seem that, at least with the Parisi involvement, there's a good chance that Parisi's vote, which is it's not small, it could be 700,000 people or more, could overwhelmingly go over to Jose Antonio Cast, and even more people who haven't voted, if there are more people, may well be impressed by the kind of media spin that is available from that sort of exotic YouTube platform of Bad Boys.
It's certainly kind of interesting, isn't it? That kind of format, to be having an interview on this Bad Boy platform with this kind of rather loose former candidate. We're kind of getting into Italian or Argentinian politics a little bit here. We're kind of straying into those waters, aren't we?
Yes, well, that's true.
Now, a lot of so there will be people who vote for Cast because they can't bear to think of a communist-backed government in office. Though, of course, the communists did participate in a Bachelet government, but in a very minor role, right? And there'll be people who can't bear to think of a Pinochet lover being the president and will vote for Boric. Any sense of which protest vote might prevail, which would be bigger?
Yes. Well, with 2 weeks to go, we can't tell. I would say one thing, in neither the case of the Boric camp nor the Kast camp, are we seeing anything that is a direct scare campaign. And I was actually expecting to see very strong scare campaigns run from both sides. Of course, we both come from Westminster system countries where there's a tradition of basically not damaging the currency, not damaging the share market by slagging off your opponent as totally economically irresponsible. You're supposed to do it in a dog whistle way by saying, we're strong economic managers, implying that we're the only strong economic managers. And I was expecting to see a much more forthright pair of campaigns along the lines of Boric is going to wreck the economy, and
right. So you're saying this kind of restraint doesn't really apply here. You're saying, and so we could have expected a real
yeah. I wasn't expecting it to apply, but it does seem to be applying. I mean, the markets bounced back when Kast got positive figures in the first round, and I don't think Boric would want to be seen to be jeopardising the economy or the economic indicators in any way that would really undercut his credibility.
Yeah, I mean, he's been very careful. He's brought on board some new economists. For example, there's Ricardo French Davis is one, for example, an absolute stalwart of the Economic Commission for Latin America for decades. As one of these stalwart figures of kind of Raúl Prebisch economics, sort of import substitution, industrialization. And Boric has echoed some of these ideas, getting away from commodities, getting away from just selling minerals and stuff abroad, developing other parts of the economy. This is pure ECLAC, pure Economic Commission stuff. Here we see that mark all over him. Of course, it's true. Clearly, Prebisch had this whole discourse of the centre and the periphery, the centre, Western Europe, the States, and obviously now more and more places, Korea, Japan. Latin America, always on the periphery, always just flogging like basketfuls of lorry loads of dirt, shiploads of dirt, which people then got bits of gold out of. And of course, he's quite right. They should get away from that model. So ECLAC have been flogging this now, though for like
70 years. Almost,
yeah, we're definitely well over the half century now.
Every institution, every institution winds up perpetuating the problem to which it is dedicated to eradicate.
Certainly, if one tries to identify areas of success, they've been hammering this message. There's a big 1950s kind of brutalist building full of economists who have been hammering this message now for many, many years. And I suppose they did get Argentina, I don't know if it was them, certainly Argentina and Brazil did follow their precepts and put up trade barriers and state-led industrialization. So one could say that they've, if that was their influence. But anyway, so now Boric is talking this way, and how that would work in practice, I mean, moving away from commodities, agriculture, and minerals into more sophisticated, I guess either you've got to have some trade barriers and things and state-led industrialization, or you just got to improve the education system, I suppose, and have more technicians, more engineers.
We've been trying to do that for a while.
Yeah, they've been trying, haven't they? But anyway, at the moment, it's a bit short on detail, so we probably better not speculate about what this is actually going to mean in practice.
Yes, I think everyone is short on details with regard to what the two candidacies offer, and there is a strong element of character judgment, a sort of personalised and team-based character judgment element to it, and the two are quite different characters, Kast and Boric. Boric represents this younger generation, perhaps not too well educated, but more formally educated, and Kast, I guess, represents a kind of socially engaged patrician in the traditional Latin American style.
And despite Cast promising to be kind of the hard man on law and order, and Boric not having, at least initially, projected that image at all, but talking about pardons, or it seemed to be rather soft on violence, and just physically in their demeanor, in the way they come across, Cast comes across as being quite soft, and you'd say he's probably got quite a limp handshake. I've never been near him, I haven't shaken his hand, but you would imagine kind of soft, faintly clammy handshake, whereas Boric, he looks like a bit of a tough, doesn't he? He looks like a character from Tolkien, perhaps a kind of, one of those, characters that work in mountains, mining under mountains in Tolkien. You know what I mean? You wouldn't want to get into a fight with him. So it's an interesting contrast, I find, between their political positions on things like, on something like that, law and order, and who's the hard man here, and just the way they come across. Cass seems very gentle, doesn't he?
Yes, in many ways. A family man, a sort of private family man with his public mission. Now it would seem to become president. And Boric seems to be growing into having a shot at winning, which it didn't look like he was trying to do previously.
Just to sort of perhaps, wind up here, so you weren't convinced that he was seriously trying to become president, and now, we think he's really
well, I've been wrong so many times over the course of this electoral campaign. I think I've backed Oscar Landereche, Sichel, Provoste, and various others at different points. So it's great fun. It's been a wonderful election. I've enjoyed it very much. And I'm looking forward to the next 2 weeks.
Right. And here, here on Chile Talk, our viewers can at least get sort of, find out who not to back from seeing who we tend to pump for.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, we'll hope this has been of some interest, and we'll try and do another one before the runoff, which is on the 17th. Is that right? Sunday the 17th.
19th.
No, 19th.
Sunday the 19th.
Sunday the 19th. Okay. Well,
my parents' wedding anniversary.
Oh, okay, jolly good. That'll be, what could be more special on your wedding anniversary than a Chilean presidential runoff?
Especially for them. Dad will probably watch this. Sometimes he watches them.
Yes. Oh dear, the world has shrunk, hasn't it? Okay.
Yes.
Hope to see you next time here on Chile Talk, and thanks for bearing with us.
Thank you.